Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe it's all about them and who cares about others. And in today's episode, we've got nasty Karen teachers, guys. They're power tripping, being lazy, and one OP tells a story about a nosy Karen teacher who oversteps boundaries and calls Child Protective Services on OP's family. It's a wild one, so sit back, relax, and seriously try not to shake your heads too hard at some of these posts. I'm a 21-year-old female, and I work at this upscale restaurant/bar. My restaurant's in a large college town where I also attend, so we have a large demographic of people coming in. This happened a few weeks ago while I was working as a host that night. As we're a bar as well, I check IDs, and I'm technically considered a bouncer, which is funny because I'm literally 125 pounds. On this day, this one woman comes in who looks to be in her 60s with someone who looks to be in her early 20s. So I was definitely going to have to card this girl. Also, under my state's laws, I can only accept the following forms of ID. It has to be a US state ID or license, a US military ID, or passports of any country. The conversation goes as follows. I say, "Hi, welcome to the restaurant. How are you doing today?" The woman immediately says to me, "Hi, this is my PhD student from such and such country, and we just wanted to get a drink together." And I want to note, I did not ask for this information. She literally just told me right off the bat, and this is the only reason why I'm mentioning it. So I say, "Okay, great. Can I see your IDs?" The girl looks a bit concerned, and she goes, "I didn't bring an ID." I let her know, "I'm sorry, but the only way I can allow you to drink is for you to present a valid ID. Well, this professor immediately gets defensive and loud. She screams and says, "I've known this girl for 4 years. Trust me, she's over 21. I let her know, "Again, I'm sorry, but I need a valid form of ID. I then list all of our valid forms, which is also posted on a sign near the entrance. She then argues and says, "She is of age, and I know it. I can vouch for her." This is when the student says, "I have my undergraduate student ID with me." She begins to take out her undergrad student ID, and I again tell them that I need a valid form of ID. I cannot accept this. The Karen says, "See, this ID shows she's over 21, so let us in." I start going into my whole spiel again, but this woman is not having it. She's lecturing me, pun intended, that a school ID is just as legit as a government-issued document. And what do I know? I'm just a minimum wage server. She's practically yelling at me and causing a whole scene in the entrance at this point. She screams and says, "This is ridiculous. She has shown you more than enough to gain entry. I know her very well, and I know she's over 21. She's a PhD student here, and I'm Professor so-and-so, and we deserve to be served." Once again, I just say to her, "Ma'am, I'm sorry about that, but the law is the law." I could get into serious trouble, not just with my boss, but with authorities by allowing someone to be served without a valid ID. Karen then says to me, "I cannot believe this. We're leaving, and don't you be surprised if you hear from your manager. You have no idea who I am." She then turns to leave, and as she's exiting, she turns back to me and she says the most bizarre thing. She says to me, "Oh, and by the way, the university that we're at, it's an accredited university," referring to the student ID. I was honestly so confused by the whole situation that I don't say anything back. And again, I'd like to say that from the beginning, this woman was hostile and extremely rude. And to just let you know how hostile she was, there was a group of 3 right behind her, and they heard the whole interaction. As soon as the woman left, they asked me, "Are you okay? That lady was so awful." So yeah, I told my boss, who also owns the place, and he was very proud of me for standing my ground. Guys, the entitlement of this professor to think she's above the law, right? And with the way she was acting, I'm convinced she must have known there would be issues since she was making a scene right off the bat. Like she probably thought she could just bully her way in and OP would just cave. And this person shares a comment on why OP had to be so strict. They say, "My son was working at a local pizza place when a coworker came in with his girlfriend. They were more or less browbeating him to accept that she was old enough and a true pal would let her lack of ID slide. It ends up being a sting setup. My son got a $300 fine and the restaurant a $1,000 fine. In the local paper, where they put a list of people who broke the law that week, it was listed as endangering the life of a minor. My son was barely 18 at the time, and it was a hard lesson learned." Let's just start with a little background here. This entitled professor taught the intro class for my university's creative writing minor, which I intended on getting. It was my second minor, and I was working towards a career in video games, so I figured learning to be a better storyteller would be very useful. Also, I'm a diagnosed narcoleptic. Basically, I'm liable to fall asleep uncontrollably at any time, especially when not doing any activity that requires frequent, quick movements. I've fallen asleep while out with friends, in the middle of concerts, and even while driving. And before you say anything, I can feel it coming, so I just pull over and no harm is done. So that said, I was taking this professor's class, and it was really clear that she played favorites. Namely, she would only care about your education if you were majoring in something like creative writing or English. Otherwise, she assumed you were only in the class for some easy credits. Since it was a small class, she knew exactly who majored in subjects related to her class and who didn't. I was a biology major, and I much preferred creative writing classes like hers over my biology classes. It was clear who her favorites were, and I wasn't one of them. Naturally, because I'm narcoleptic, sometimes I'd fall asleep for a few minutes during class. It happened to me during all of my classes, no matter how hard I tried to stay awake. Normally, my professors are pretty sympathetic, but not this woman. One day, she rages at me in the middle of class. The conversation went something like this. She screams at me and she says, "Why can't you ever stay awake during my class? Am I that boring to you?" I reply, "I'm sorry, but like I've said before, I'm narcoleptic. I fall asleep uncontrollably and I can't stop it." She then says to me, "But it happens every single day." I tell her that's what narcolepsy is. Again, I can't control it. I'm really sorry. I try very hard not to, but I can't help it. She just says to me, "Well, it's incredibly disruptive, not to mention disrespectful, so get out of my classroom." I respond, "It's not personal, I have a disability." She just screams, "Get out." So I left the class, completely livid. Now, I knew that probably wasn't something she was allowed to do, especially not with me having a diagnosed medical condition. So I immediately researched the school policy and confirmed that she was not allowed to kick me out of her class because of a disability. So I went straight to my advisor, who was a wonderful woman, and I told her everything that happened. She was speechless, saying that she'd never seen anything like this happen, and she wasn't completely sure how to deal with it. She just said she'd make some calls. Later that day, I get an email from the professor which said the following. She wrote to me and said, "OP, it's just not acceptable. You need to get some rest before you return to class. It's insulting, not to say a waste of your time." I write back and say I have a sleep disorder. I'm trying to get it treated, but it's a slow process. I'm sorry if that's upsetting to you. If it's that big of a problem, I will have no choice but to drop your class. She replies, "Yes, OP, sleeping in class is that big of a deal. It's probably best to drop the course. I'm sorry it didn't work out." My advisor came through though, and I came to the next class with a letter from Disability Services telling her that she had no right to expel me from her class, and she had the nerve to call me incredibly disrespectful for daring to put up a fight and that I should, quote, "know my place." In the end, I stayed in her class, passed it, and I got my creative writing minor. The last time I saw this professor was at a ceremony where I officially declared my minor in creative writing. She couldn't believe that I actually cared about the subject matter all along. Her reaction was priceless. What a great ending to that post, and good on OP for going straight to the administration about this and having something done about it. And what a nasty teacher. Like, she knows OP's a diagnosed narcoleptic, but she still had the nerve to act like that. And this person says, it's probably too late now, but if something like that happens, do not go to the school about it, because they will only try to cover their asses. You need to go to a lawyer and sue the school and professor because it's illegal to openly discriminate against someone with disabilities, and those emails would most definitely damn her in court. So back in college, I was getting a degree in journalism, and I only had a few classes left. One of the classes was mass communications, which was taught primarily by a professor that I cordially detested. Let's call her Jen. Jen was a longtime media professional who believed that the best way to teach us was to tell us about her amazing experiences in radio. The problem being that she did this at the expense of teaching the material, and then she tested us on the material. Basically, she would spend 3 hours a week bragging and then expect us to study this material on our own. And the thing is, asking her about the material led to tangents about her professional life. And if you could catch her in the office hours, she would do the same thing. So with no choice but to take yet another class with her, I signed up for mass communications and I settled in. Immediately, there was a problem. There was no book for this course. There were no handouts. It was Jen and a PowerPoint. The format of the class was Jen would click next slide. She would tell us a story about her life, and if we were really lucky, she would read the slide, and the story would correlate to what was on the slide. There was also only 2 graded assignments in her class, the midterm essay and the final exam. Now, I can write 1,000 words about anything, so the midterm didn't concern me, but the final was going to be a test over the slides that she was so quickly glossing over. About a week before the final, she tells us the rules. We're allowed to have 1 sheet of notes, and she'll allow anyone who asks a copy of her PowerPoint to study. My dad had told me a story once of a student gaming an open notes test, and I had nothing to lose, so I raised my hand. I ask, can the notes be front and back? Jen says, that's fine. I ask, do they have to be our own notes? Jen says, no, we can get together, swap notes, all that jazz. I then ask, handwritten or typed? Well, now she's getting annoyed and she says, either is fine. Going for broke, I ask one last question. I ask, are there any formatting restrictions? She says, no. I then thank her and let her get back to bragging. Naturally, I asked her for her PowerPoint. I went home and I spent 3 hours copying and pasting every single slide's worth of text onto a 5-column, 4-point font single sheet of paper front and back. And let me tell you, these are God's own notes, the be-all, end-all. It's the entire semester's worth of class material, all on 1 page. I then printed 30 copies, and I gave one to everyone. The class tested half 1 week, half the next. After the first test, Jen came back, and she held up the exams, and she said, whose notes are these? I raised my hand, and that's when she says, I said you can share it with your friends, and you just thought that you'd share it with all 30 of your best friends? I responded, well, you did say that we didn't have to use our own notes. And for the first time in years, according to other professors I was friends with, Jen's mass communications class had a 100% pass rate. But the story doesn't end there. Next semester, an acquaintance, who we'll call Laura, approaches me, and she asked if I still had the notes. I said yes, and I sent them to her. Now, Jen had gotten wise to this, and she restricted notes to a pair of index cards. Laura, the absolute madwoman, managed to fit my godly notes on 2 index cards. And for the second time, there was a 100% passing rate. The next semester, I'm approached by this one girl named Ellen asking about the God Notes. I emailed them to her on the spot as I kept them on a Google Drive, and I asked her about the restrictions on the notes this semester. Turns out, Jen said they had to be handwritten, but we were back to a standard sheet of printer paper. Ellen assured me that this would be no issue. 3 days later, she comes in and she shows me that she can apparently handwrite in 4-point font. And apparently, scanning and duplicating them was allowed, as long as they were handwritten. Cue another 100% pass rate. The next semester, Jen ordered textbooks and she rewrote the curriculum. And in the last 2 classes I had with her, she was very careful to stick to the material. And as far as I know, she never gave out her PowerPoints as a study guide ever again. Guys, I love the fact that because of OP, Jen had to rewrite the whole curriculum entirely. And as someone who's personally had egotistical teachers like this before, OP's a freaking hero. Like, you're paying good money to take a course, and imagine having a teacher who won't stop bragging about themselves. And what's worse than a teacher who won't stop talking about themselves is a teacher who doesn't care about the kids at all, like the Karen in this next post. Listen to this. 2 decades ago, I was in grade 2. I had this one teacher who was an absolute bitch. Let's call her Miss Karen. I'm talking yelling at kids, throwing stuff at them, giving kids detention for the most minor of things. The list goes on and on. Anyways, I have asthma. It's less intense these days, but back then, asthma attacks were very regular for me, like nightly occurrences. This of course meant I had to have my inhaler with me at all times, and I had multiple backups. One the school had, one my mother had, one my father had, and I also had a backup at home. Now, in Australia during the summer period, we do swimming practice. The whole grade catches a bus down to the local swimming pool, and the swimming instructors teach us all how to swim. I did this as every other kid did. But since it's a swimming pool, I had to be extra careful about having an asthma attack while swimming, as it could be quite dangerous, especially considering there were over 100 kids, which means it becomes hard to notice one who dips under. So here I am, grade 2, 6 years old. It's about March and I'm excited to go swimming. Miss Karen is going by each kid in the class, making sure they have swimmers, they've got the signed notes from their parents, yada yada. She sees me with my inhaler and she asked why I need it. I explain it's because of my asthma, and she just says, "That's stupid, give me that." Now, I know I needed this, but I was also taught to not disobey teachers. I explain again that I need it because it's dangerous for me to go without it. She just grabs it out of my hands and she goes on about how I'm faking it for attention, and she puts it in her drawer before we all leave. Of course, I'm starting to panic, not because I've basically never been away from my inhaler, but also because my mom would kill me if I lost it. So we go swimming and everyone gets changed. I'm being even more antisocial as I'm upset, but nobody notices. Everyone gets in the freezing cold water, and as you can imagine, the fear, the anxiety, and cold water all trigger an asthma attack right in the middle of swimming. I go straight under, panicking like heck. Fortunately, one of the instructors who was familiar with me and my asthma saw me go under. They pulled me straight out. I was okay though. I didn't swallow enough water to cause damage or anything, but that made me terrified of water for years. And even now, I still have a fear I'm going to drown. Anyway, when my mom found out, as you can imagine, she went scorched earth. I don't remember the exact details, but I do have vague memories of my mom screaming at this teacher in class and going to the Board of Education for Queensland in an attempt to get this woman seriously effing punished for her negligence. Good on mom for going scorched earth on this teacher, and I think we can all agree that she should lose her teaching degree. And just like the Karen professor a few stories back, guys, like how in the world are you going to know that a student has asthma and needs an inhaler and still have the nerve to take it away? Like, some teachers are so nasty, they literally want students to suffer. So for some context, my mom was in and out of the hospital when I was around 10 to 13 years old because of a bipolar disorder. By the time this all went down, when I was 15, my mom was doing better. She was home and even working. So in my final year of secondary school, one of my teachers began pulling me out of class in the middle of my lessons. And at first, she wanted to chat about my grades, which were average. But then, she starts asking more and more intrusive questions about my mom and her illness. And she began to compare my mother's illness to her mother, who had apparently suffered the same thing. And she began telling me sob stories about her childhood. She also began asking me uncomfortable questions about my home life, saying that she's a teacher and if something's wrong, she needs to know. I didn't say much, I just sat there feeling very confused about this all. This happened over the course of 3 months, and eventually, I got really sick of her asking me all these questions, and I snapped. I told her to stop pulling me out of classes and to leave me the heck alone. I turned to leave and go back to class, and that's when she grabs me by the arm and she tells me if I continue withholding information from her, that she would have no choice but to call Child Protective Services. I just told her to call them, that they wouldn't find anything and she'd be wasting their time. A few days later, I get called out of the classroom, not by her, but by my principal, who takes me to her office, where a CPS worker, my mom, and my dad's waiting. I realize I already knew this woman. She was at our house a few times while mom was ill. The CPS worker, my parents, and I talked, and she came to the conclusion that everything was fine. I broke down in tears because the whole situation had been really stressful and my parents were pissed. They demanded to know why the heck this teacher thought it was okay to harass me about something that was none of her business. We never got a proper answer and the teacher refused to say anything. The CPS lady was angry about having her time wasted, and she demanded some type of action from the principal. In the end, the teacher wasn't allowed to be in a room alone with me anymore, and under no circumstances was to take me out of the classroom alone. Eventually, she was moved to another class, and she was later let go for harassment and assault of another student. And by the way, I didn't tell my parents early on because I was a dumb kid thinking that I would get in trouble. This occurred way back in my junior year of high school. I was in a computer class, and it was a very general class, where we learned how to type, but also got to learn a bit of Adobe Photoshop and Music Studio. The teacher who normally taught the class had a baby prior to the semester that I took the class, so a substitute teacher covered her entire maternity leave. Now, this substitute was a complete bitch. She was stuck up, and she went on this little power trip over us students. The fun and entertainment I got from the original teacher's typing class was now replaced by an evil woman who expected us to be professionals at programs we only just learned about. She even laughed at my first Photoshop assignment because she didn't like the subject matter. It was a mech robot with a Gundam-inspired energy sword that I drew and colored by hand, and this project took me a month to complete. I used Photoshop to clean up some of the rough edges to make it look even more realistic. It was a feat that should have been awarded high marks, but because she hated the subject matter, it got a D+. The next week, we start our segment on Music Studio. Her assignment was to create a music clip that sounded weird or funny. I find a synthwave in the program labeled Final Crash, and I played it to myself. A descending crescendo followed by a final beat in an upbeat chord. Using the software, I create a loop of the sound clip, and I reversed it, playing the sound forward and reversed in repeating patterns for about 15 seconds. My fellow students found the resulting music to be hilarious, but this teacher absolutely hated it. She even went into dry heaves at the sound of it. She gave me a 0 on this assignment, and she threatened me with detention if I ever played this sound again. She was convinced I wasn't taking this project seriously, and I was just mocking her. I was on the brink of failing my class because of the way she was grading my work, so this was the determining factor for me to get back at her. Now, I didn't mind a few detentions from a teacher I disliked, if it meant making her life a living hell for a few weeks as a taste of the hell that she put me through. I had a friend who did some of the IT work for the school as a part of his aspirations to get a computer science degree. So I gave him the offending sound clip and he notified the teacher that he needed to perform an update on her computer during lunch break. My class was after her lunch, so I got to see my plan pan out in all of its glory. And here's what happened. My friend went into the sound files of her computer and he replaced all of her notification sounds with a 3-second piece of this sound clip. So every time she received an email, instant message, or any other warning from her computer, this sound would play at nearly maximum volume. The added bonus being that to prevent students from tampering with teachers' computers, they needed to put an IT password to access the control panels and turn it off. This was an IT password they didn't share with substitute teachers because of access to grading and transcripts. The substitute teacher had a complete meltdown after just 2 emails. She sent me to the office and she tried to have me expelled because of this sound. But that didn't happen, although the principal did find it funny. She unplugged her computer and she demanded a replacement computer for the final 2 weeks she was there. The other students in my class decided to play the sound clip from their computers to drive her bonkers. We even managed to get the sound clip to play, quote, accidentally during the morning announcements, which I can only imagine drove her crazy. When the original teacher returned from maternity leave, I, as well as other students, asked her to review our old projects. She changed a lot of grades, and kids often saw D or C graded assignments, earning an A+ after reviewing. I have no idea what happened to her, but we never did see her again the rest of our high school years. What OP and their classmates did was awesome, and I only wish OP shared a sound clip because I just want to know the sound that drove this woman crazy. But yeah, let that be a lesson learned, Miss Karen. You don't come into someone's class, start power tripping and failing everyone because 30 students versus 1 substitute teacher. I don't think anyone could win that battle because kids are savage, not to mention a-holes, guys. And this person shares a short story about a power tripping sub, and they say, so back in 2008, I had this nasty substitute teacher try to stop me from leaving class. After I finished my work for the day, class was an hour and I finished my work in 25 minutes. I had been reading up on everything, literally, up until the class started, so everything was fresh in my mind and I soared through it. At the time, our principal had set something up called Productivity Week, which was trying to promote productivity in students by rewarding extra hard studying, by allowing them to leave early if they completed their work for class early. So I get up, walked to the desk, put my answers into the in tray, walked back to my desk, grabbed my bag, and started walking out the door. This is when the substitute teacher stops me and she says, whoa, 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 where are you going? I respond, I'm going to the library to read up for the next class. The sub tells me, no you're not, class isn't over, sit down. I tell her, yes I am. We're allowed to leave early if we finish our work before the end of class. It's part of Productivity Week. I then point towards the giant banner over the desk that explains it all. She then says, no, this is my classroom today, and I don't believe in that, so sit down quietly until the end of class. I start laughing at this point and walk out. The sub tried to reprimand me and have me sign this thing that pretty much said that I would have to stick to a pre-approved plan to change my attitude and behavior. They were called BCPs, a behavioral contingency plan, and they were very common at my school. I just picked it up, walked out again, and I went straight to the principal's office with her in tow. I went to the front desk and I asked the lady if I could speak with the principal, very politely I might add, and she said she would buzz him out. The principal comes out from his office and he asked, what's this about? The sub goes on and says, well, he walked out of my class when we weren't even halfway through the class hour. I responded, after I finished my work. I then said to the principal, this is still Productivity Week, isn't it? The principal says, yes, of course it is. I told you about this when you came in this morning. The sub tries to argue him and says, "I don't want that hogwash making my students think they can leave whenever they like." And he was being disrespectful towards me. The principal says to her, "That's enough. I don't care if you agree with it. This is what's happening, and it's not your classroom." Now, I don't know what happened after that, as I was told to leave, but she finished out the day, and I never saw her again in the remaining 2 years I was there. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/entitled people, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode where people obey a manager so hard, the guy ruins his life. It's such a wild episode. So go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.